Today we are going to be taking a look at 5 things that Marvel's Spider-Man on the PS4. Now this is the game before Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales. Yes, they are close names, but this is the original game with Peter Parker. 5 things that this game did, in our opinion, much better than Miles Morales was able to do in the PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4 title. Now, today I have Alex from Podcast Now with me. We are talking about this together. He's a big Spidey fan. He loves all these different topics that we've been talking about together. And I hope you'll check out his channel, which is linked in the description and in the comments down below, where he does a wide variety of content and is a good friend of mine. And I'm over on his channel sometimes too. He has me on there out of pity and out of kindness to make me feel important. And I really appreciate that, Alex. Thank you for being here.
No problem. It's my pleasure. And honestly, it's always a blast talking with you, and I can't wait to do it's always an honor to be on a 5 things video of yours. I feel like that's another tier, so I'm very happy you allowed me to be on this.
Yeah, depending on who you talk to, it's either another tier or I'm always scraping the bottom of the barrel, and these are my worst videos. So it really depends on who you speak to, I guess. Yeah. So, hey, thanks for being here. Let's hop right into it with the first thing that Marvel's Spider-Man did better.
Number 5.
The first one is definitely costume selection. Now, in some ways, I felt like this was an unfair criticism because Miles has been around a lot shorter of a time period in the comic books. So Miles does have a lot less costumes to pick from. However, at the end of the day, this is still a video game, and there are more costumes in Peter Parker's title, and many of them are extremely detailed, very interesting, have their own interesting suit powers. There's a lot to them. And now this has even been expanded more because we've finally gotten to see the Amazing Spider-Man movie suit in the game, which looks absolutely incredible. I love it. It's great. Everybody makes fun of it because his head looks like a basketball, but hey, that is par for the course. They've even been adding in costumes to the PlayStation 4 version still. They went back and patched in more. This was a huge selling point and really a point of passion for the team at Insomniac, very clearly that they really wanted to expand Peter Parker's cosmetic options in this game and give that into player hands.
Yeah, totally. I think I always say this when I talk about the costumes, in that for me, I'm not a costume guy. And people ask me sometimes, make Batman videos or something on, best costumes or what costumes you want to see. And I always say, like, I pick the default character look. I play with the original costume. I'm not really a costume guy, but to Spider-Man, and this is the whole point, Spider-Man 1 or Spider-Man, the PS4 game, that got me into it. That was the first game that I was like, holy God, like, I want to see what all of these look like in the game. A lot of them have their own, unique feature, which I do think Miles kind of lacks. Some of them did. I think less than half, though. I don't know the exact number of the suits, but I think there was 16 or 17 suits, but I think less than half actually had like abilities attached, whereas Spider-Man had much more. So yeah, I think the importance of that, to even just to me as a gamer, I think will always make that game more powerful, because I did not care about costumes. I played that game, and that's the only game, maybe even besides Miles, that I'm like, yeah, I want to unlock, and I want to play as every single costume this game has.
Yeah, I completely agree. They did such a good job doing that, and the fact that they've even continued to add them in now in both the remaster and the original PS4 version, it's pretty incredible. Most of them are free. There are some that were included with The City That Never Sleeps, which is pretty cool as well, but it's really a neat precedent that they set. I think that too, not to talk too much about Avengers here, but I think that how well Spider-Man was able to do costumes is also really what made Avengers and other games look a lot worse, because they were just able to do it so perfectly.
Yep, totally. Yeah, and we'll see how that works for games like Gotham Knights, Suicide Squad, because now the bar is set, and if you don't do interactive things with the suits, you don't do enough suits, and it's not even actually about number too, I would say. It's just kind of like being able to see these things on screen and having them each be very different from each other. Again, not just in looks, but sometimes other things, sometimes in how they interact. We even look at, the good thing Miles did, like the Into the Spider-Verse suit, right, was so incredible. So that's a really key strength in both the games. We're not saying, by the way, like the Miles stuff is like god awful, right? But we're saying, Spider-Man, I think, did it a lot better.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Number 4.
So the next one that we have is a more powerful story. Now, I already feel the keyboards typing, but I said that the story was more focused and, more to the point in Miles Morales, which I really liked a lot. Yes, I do think that. I think that the story is shorter in Miles Morales, so it's able to be more focused into, just a couple of plot points that are hit right on the head and you move along. However, I do still think that even though it's not as focused, because there are way more plot lines, there's subplots, there's many more characters, there's things going on in their lives in the original Marvel Spider-Man, it also does become more powerful because all of those plot lines are able to sort of come together into one big plot line by the end versus just focusing on, say, one plot line. So while Miles is more direct and more to the point, which I do like, I do think that Spider-Man, the original, is still able to be much more powerful because of all these different things that are going on at the same time.
Yeah, and I'll say something more controversial to get things off of your back, Jay, in that, I'll say right out that I like these stories. I think they're really good stories. I don't think they're the greatest things ever told on planet Earth. I know some people may go so far as to say that. Obviously, anybody can think whatever they want, and I encourage that. But, I think Spider-Man PS4 story was really, really good. I don't think it was the most amazing thing ever. But, yeah, I think it had time to breathe. And I agree with Jay. I actually really liked the more direct, more let's just get down to it in Miles. But, and it's something we'll talk about in another point later on, I think that ends up becoming more where you have to rush things, where things become like, well, we just have to get to this point, right? So we have to do something maybe we would have let breathe a little bit more in a normal game. And that's not, that's nothing against the game. Like I said, like Miles' story is actually really, really good. I felt a lot of emotion. There's a lot of really amazing things. But for Spider-Man PS4, I think it just had more time. It just had more time to develop these characters. They had more characters altogether. I just think everything kind of flowed pretty well. Again, it's not like my top 5 story of all time, but I do think, 2018's game was better.
Number 3.
Character reveals are much more powerful as well and more impactful in Marvel's Spider-Man in the original game. Now, we're going to assume that you did play through that whole original game. I have no problem with spoilers for that. I will say that because I did say that we weren't going to do spoilers for Miles Morales in the previous video, that I'm going to be careful what I say in this one and not reveal who anyone is. So we're going to avoid revealing like who the enemy is and stuff like that. But we will say that you don't know who enemies are, like the Tinkerer and people like that, for a very short amount of time before they just straight up tell you, hey, here's more about this character. There's really no dramatic effect to that.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's pretty straight and easy. Without going into the specifics, they don't give them enough time, and that's just flat. And they do that with a cut. And again, we'll talk about supporting characters and stuff later, but they don't give certain things enough time. The Tinkerer, you don't know. The idea of not knowing who that character is, it doesn't last nearly. And I thought, I actually had a prediction going into this game that we would find out relatively quickly. I was blown away at how fast it happened. Where I was like, wait, did they just do it right now? Because I was expecting it like in another 30, 40, 50 minutes, but they do it, almost right away. So yeah, that's without going into it. They do it a couple times. That's another thing. It's not just once, it's a couple times throughout the game. And it's just not something that I think works. If there is, and I think I've said this before, if there is a weakness with Miles' story, it's that there's no time to breathe with that. And I think that just factually, or I guess all of this is opinionated, but I really do think that takes away from the emotion and impact of the game. Whereas with, 2018's, there's a lot of things that build up throughout the entire game. Some things are legitimately shocking. It's not even just all at the ending, right? There's some things put throughout the game that are legitimately like, oh man, I didn't see that coming. Or maybe you did, but they gave it time to develop. And I think they did and again, that's not Miles' fault. It's a game that's half the time of Spider-Man. So it's not necessarily their fault, but it's easily, I think this would be, if we were ranking it, this would be not my number 1 of what it did better.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think too that one of the most frustrating things to me with Miles, and this is coming from someone who loves the game obviously, is the fact that there wasn't really any dramatic tension built up because of that in a lot of parts of the game, because you just are going into situations totally knowing what's going on. There's really no foreshadowing. There is so much foreshadowing in the original Marvel Spider-Man to Doc Ock, and even to the prison break and other things like that. There's just a lot of things mentioned and brought up over time where you can tell where the story could be going or where it is going. And with Miles Morales, they just straight up tell you where it's going, I think, which is a little different.
Number 2.
there's more going on in the world of the original. Now, sometimes I wouldn't say criticized, I've critiqued the original world a little bit in terms of it was really sold as a very livable world, but really a lot of people are just kind of walking around not doing much. What I will say, though, about that is that there's much more of that, you know? So I guess this is the point I'm going to hit that some people are going to really disagree with me on. I think that these worlds are not the most livable worlds in the universe. However, I do think that the original game is able to put more NPCs in, have a little bit more going on. It feels like a more lived-in world, whereas Miles has that in segments, like when you're in Harlem. And I'm not going to talk about the story here, but you actually see that in the gameplay reveal trailer where you're walking around Harlem a little bit. It's more like you see that livable world in subsections of the game, whereas, in Peter's game, you kind of see it throughout the entire thing.
Yeah, no, I think that's 100% correct. I think with Spider-Man, like, and this is, Jay and I were trying to figure out what this could be, and I suggested, this, and we almost didn't put on because it's like, yeah, the crimes, the side missions, they were I would say probably the weakest part of 2018 Spider-Man. That there's the crimes they're too common, they happen too much, and they're also doing the exact same thing over and over, and you can't swing more than 10 seconds without a crime happening, and that gets annoying. That doesn't actually, like, yeah, it is livable, the world is definitely having things happen, but it becomes an annoyance, and you don't want to cross that line. So this isn't like a perfect thing. This isn't even something I would say the 2018's game did like exceptionally well. I think it just did do it better than Miles, which Jay, to adding on to your thing too, where like they did it in segments. I don't know about you, but like when I was playing Miles, maybe it's because it was like not a retread, but because it was the same city. Like we were swinging through it again, and it had like the Christmas thing on top of it. It just didn't feel like I was in the world as much as I was because I was already in it once. Does that make sense? Like I already got the full impact of it, and I just felt like I was doing it again, which kind of hurt the overall livability part.
Yeah, it's weird because to me, I like the way the world looks a lot better in Miles. Like,
I'm a sucker for Christmas, so that was much better.
Yeah, that's amazing. The general tone of that and everything that's going on there is fantastic. But I think the problem is that because it's pretty much the exact same world, just with snow thrown over it, I'm fine with it for this one. If this had been the first world with that level of interactivity and it's during Christmas and stuff, I would say that this would be like perfection, in terms of the world and in terms of the livability. I think this also came up too, not to shill for a video that you made, but it's something I've considered talking about with the setting of the next Spider-Man. And you talked about the leaks and the possibilities of it being set in Tokyo or somewhere else. I think that that's very interesting because I do think they're going to hit a point where if you're just reusing the same New York over and over again, it does lose its impact. You even saw that in the Arkham series where they would use different sections of Gotham so that wouldn't happen. And so far, there's only 2 games, so maybe this is unfair, but we're not seeing much of that out of Spider-Man so far.
Number one.
The final thing that we do have as well, it ties back into the story a little bit, but I do think, again, a lot of these criticisms are hard because Miles has been around a lot shorter of a time period than Peter Parker, but because of that, it also does tie into the game design and the writing, and there is a much wider cast of characters in the original Marvel Spider-Man that tie into the story. And some of them are brought into Miles Morales, J. Jonah Jameson, obviously references to Mary Jane, we have Peter on the phone, some stuff like that, but really overall, there's just so many characters throughout the original game. You have, obviously, Spider-Man, you have Yuri, you have a lot of other people like the villains, Doc Ock, Electro, Scorpion, all these different people, along with side characters that help Peter Parker out. And in Miles, you just have a few of them. And so, yes, again, you kind of hit is more less, like more is less or less is more or whatever you want to say. But it does seem like while there is a focus on fewer characters, the characters end up being more memorable in the original Marvel Spider-Man and more iconic, even though there are more of them.
Right. No, and to back Jay up too, if there's anybody that would get mad about the whole, like, maybe they think Miles is just so far superior, one thing to know, like, behind the scenes, we actually had a pretty tough time right? I think that's probably fair to say. We had a tough time making this list because Miles does actually a considerable, I would say it does more things right than more things better than Spider-Man does Miles. So I think that's important to note that, yeah, we're nitpicking and maybe people won't agree with all of these, but this was actually a really hard list because Miles is such a good game. But yeah, I agree. I think this I feel like is kind of like more in numbers, just like because there's more of them, but also again because it gives them time, and that's how many times we have to say it. It's harder for Miles. There's less time. There's just the story's not as long. There's less things to do, so you can't have as many characters as Spider-Man because it wouldn't work, right? Everything kind of has to be shrunk a little, and there's literally nothing wrong with that. It's just I think by doing that, yeah, I mean MJ is a phenomenal. I really do like MJ. I love Laura Bailey's performance. I love just any of the characters really that they come up with. They made a really amazing supporting cast that, like Jay said, like Rhino, some of these characters carry over to Miles Morales and they make them better. Like a lot of people like Rhino more and Miles. Well, it would be different if he didn't start out in Spider-Man. You know what I mean? So we had time to kind of understand his character just a little bit. So yeah, I think they did a really, really amazing job with the supporting characters. Maybe because there were so many, we were giving it to it, but I do agree there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that there's so much that Miles does better. And if you haven't seen that list, I actually did make that list as well, which is going to be on the channel. I hope you check that out as well. This was very difficult to come up with. We don't try to nitpick games or sort of, be like, oh, well, where can we tear this down? But I did want to make a companion piece to the previous video that I made. And I think it was much easier to find things Miles did better than it was to find the original because it's such a tight and focused experience, very on what it's trying to do compared to the original, which is just trying to be huge. And I think the original had a much bigger burden too because it was trying to salvage Spider-Man. Spider-Man had a lot of years of up and down games in quality. Some of them were great, some of them were mediocre, some of them were awful. And it was trying to overcome that entire history and reintroduce the world to Spider-Man games and be like, from here on out, they're going to be good, which I think was a bigger burden than Miles actually had to bear in a lot of ways, which is, worth giving the original credit for, but also just pointing out how good Miles is. So, hey, Alex, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciated having you. Do you have any closing thoughts or anything before I just wrap this all up?
An absolute blast making this. I love talking about both these games. And yeah, like you said, this was a tough one. It would have been much easier for the other one, which you already did, and you did an amazing job on it. So both of these games, just to not upset people, we do love both of these games. I love both of these games. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I completely agree. Alex, thank you so much for being here again. I hope that everybody checks out your channel. It is linked in the description down below and in the pinned comment, which I'm doing my best to actually remember this time. So I hope everybody will check that out. And also, be sure to subscribe to this channel as well for more similar content. I've been doing a lot of really fun stuff and having a great time, and I appreciate all of you. We are over 65K, and it has been an absolute blast. I'm looking forward to reading your comments down below and seeing what you think, and I will talk to you in the next one. Have a fantastic day, and as always, stay shway.